they messed up those steps in some respects. Now that's a layman's conversation
That's
on what's
what we can
happening.
understand.
So we understand that Ampligen was a miracle drug for a subgroup.
Right.
My understanding of it, correct me if I'm wrong, and you will, is that they didn't create the right subsets in order to test, and they didn't function in the right way in order to do those tests. And so I think it was 3-2, they rejected it? Was that the?
It was a pretty narrow.
Yeah, it was very narrow anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have, the company that makes Ampligen, they're idiots, and I have no problem calling them.
Better you say that than us.
So many people.
But it's good to know, though, that a lot of the efforts of the patient community, you're telling me that from your sense of it is that the FDA is taking the illness seriously. So
Yes.
that's good.
Yes, and they've even given it the label serious.
Cool.
That's great.
good deal.
That's like the good housekeeping seal of approval for
Yeah. Yeah.
conditions.
And now what they're waiting, well, what industry is waiting for is the regulatory framework from the FDA to proceed. And part of this meeting is to actually develop that regulatory roadmap.
You brought up a thing that I don't want us to gloss over or miss. It takes the FDA to notice it before pharmaceuticals will get engaged and involved in investing in it. But once they notice it, and they notice it high on their list, the first of 20, suddenly these R&D guys sitting around all these pharmaceuticals going, how are we going to get money next year? You know, what are we going to develop to make money next year? They get the same press we do. And they go, well, this is interesting. And so now that little thing begins to snowball into a, oh, maybe we need to check this out. Let's Google some patient groups. I mean, you know, and then it's a snowball rolling downhill. So one thing doesn't sit in isolation. One thing begets another, but it all starts with the advocacy efforts that we've done over the years has produced this recognition, if you will, of the FDA, which now has a ripple effect through the pharmaceutical industry.
That's great.
Very good news.
What about medical schools? Are they teaching to doctors and nurses? Are they have a curriculum for chronic fatigue syndrome? Or?
That's still, you know, hasn't gone very far. And I did show you our Medscape effort, and recently the CDC has, you know, they worked with Tony Komaroff and Nancy Klimas and Cindy Bateman for another CME for ME CFS medical education, but it really hasn't infiltrated into the medical school curriculum very effectively yet. Again, I think that's going to change because of probably a lot of influence of pharma.
Yeah.
You know, pharma has really driven a lot of what happens in medical school because of the treatments that are available, right? You can understand the mechanism because you understand the drug and how it works, and therefore you can explain it, you can treat it. So.
Well, it no doubt made a huge difference for fibromyalgia when suddenly Neurontin or Lyrica or
Right.
Cymbalta became
Right.
approved, and
Right.
suddenly we walk into the office and the doctor says, oh, here's a drug that was approved by the FDA. You must have fibromyalgia. So,
It must exist now.
Yeah, it exists now because Novartis thinks it exists.
So one of the findings of BioVista, the drug repurposing company, was that was an interesting finding, and it was a counterintuitive finding that a lot of the drugs that are used in ME CFS by physicians are for depression, and they are actually very powerful inducers of fatigue. And
they cause fatigue.
They cause fatigue. They might work well for the depression, But it turns out that biologically, and I can show you all of the pin-headed molecules and pathways that they went through to demonstrate this, they actually exacerbate the core symptoms of CFS.
Now, my
And
physician
that used to
has
be
always,
the first drug of choice.
And it still is,
they're,
and it still is.
which drug did she say?
What'd you say, Arlene?
The
It's the
SSRIs.
first drug
Oh, the
of choice.
SSRIs are the
They're
first
saying
drugs that they want to
My
try.
physician
Antidepressants.
gives me the
They always make more
antidepressant for
exhaustion.
pain. Is that,
That's right. They,
is that correct?
so that's what we were talking about
Does it
too.
help the pain?
So they give SSRIs
No.
for sleep, and maybe that would help your
What
pain.
if you're not sleeping but 3 hours at a stretch anyway?
Yeah.
And so,
Again, it's an interesting chemistry and
Okay.
process that
okay.
I don't think we would have really realized had these guys not found this out when they did this work. And we'll be writing this all up and hopefully making it a much more widely known that, prescribing approaches for ME/CFS need to change.
Speaking of,
What would you recommend for fatigue? For depression then? If the antidepressant drugs cause more fatigue, which I've experienced, what do you do for fatigue? Depression. I'm being really tempted.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm not a physician, and I don't even play one on film.
We got that on film.
Suzanne, speaking of repurposing, did the Rituxan that was found in Norway, that is helping people with chronic fatigue, is that research gone anywhere that you're aware of?
We did actually get a news feed from a Norwegian paper, and Google Translate did a horrible job of translating it into English, that they did receive funding for their phase, I think it's phase 3, so it's the larger study to test it on a larger population. And we do know of a couple of independent efforts. So the Open Medicine Institute in Palo Alto is doing a rituximab study.
What do you think of those? What do you think of this study? What's your sense of it? Is it interesting? Is it hard to say at this point?
So we organized a meeting at the Memory Center, Cold Spring Harbor, and it was all on treatment. So I invited clinicians from around the world, including the Norwegians, who came and presented their study. And it was split between the group. So it was a group about this large. And some of them said, boy, if this is real, this is going to be a game changer for CFS. And then other people said, I don't buy it. The people that didn't buy it because they thought that the Norwegian population that they tested with the rituximab was a highly selected population. They were coming to an oncology clinic, first of all, and so they were different.
Right.
And plus, genetically, the Norwegians are much more homogeneous there in Norway. So those were some of the things that were brought up by the skeptics. The game changers thought that, wow, if this is real, if this can be replicated, then this will be a game changer. Some of the measurement approaches that they did, and this speaks to the Ampligen study too, that the Norwegians did, are not conventional or accepted assessments by, let's say, the FDA, for example. So they're using tools or asking questions that aren't standardized in any way, shape, or form. So that's a big problem. But then it did spur on a couple of investigators that were at this meeting to say, I believe something is autoantibody-like or an autoimmune-like component of ME/CFS. I'm going to go test it. So a couple of investigators used our biobank, and then they worked with a bunch of other investigators to look for autoantibodies directed against the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And we've actually just got the last batch of results in, and there's no indication of autoantibodies to the brain or to the periphery, which was interesting because I've myself written proposals to the NIH saying that there's autoantibodies going on here, but there was no indication. Actually, there was more autoantibodies in the healthy control population.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that interesting?
wonder if she's getting threes.
Which is interesting because it shows that some level of autoimmunity in each of us helps to do some house cleaning too. Probably.
That's part of being a healthy person, is to have some autoimmune process in your
But in most instances, we were exactly the same. You know, healthy and ME Sacto were exactly the same. So that was one study that came out of that, which kind of swayed my opinion a little bit about autoantibody. And another very kind of hot off the press finding is from Patrick McGowan. And so in his epigenetic profiling, he's working with an investigator at University of Virginia to actually tease out from these chemical patterns, from this sequence data, what cell type it is that's modified. Because remember, they're looking at whole blood. Whole blood has a bunch of different cell types in there. And so using specific sequence information from the cells, they then say, this is an NK cell, this is a B cell, this is a T cell. And one of the negative results is that there's no differences in the B cell population between the CFS and the controls. Now, that's important because B cells are the cells that make the antibodies that produce the autoimmunity. So they appear to be exactly the same, no difference. So that's another piece that doesn't seem to play into the autoantibody.
May issue Discover magazine just had an article on that for CFS.
T-cell.
B cell.
Right.
Same issues.
Well, I think Suzanne might be ahead of Discover magazine.
I think so.
So I think, I do think that you can, again, just like I told you, we're going to select for the population that we think will respond to this drug combination. You could probably find a CFS population, just like the Norwegians did, that has an autoimmune component to it. We know that there is a higher risk of the development of certain types of blood cancers in ME Sacto populations. So that, lymphoma, Dan Peterson has shown this. In some of his populations, they develop lymphomas, which are the type of cancer from B cells. That is the kind of cell that is nuked, is taken out by that drug, by the Rituxan drug. So you can select. You can cherry pick, which is what hemispheric should have done.
Right.
They should have cherry picked.
That's one of the worries I have for the first drug that comes out for CFS, that it's going to get a big write-up, and then from then on, anyone who says, oh, I have chronic fatigue, they'll be like, well, take the pill for it. And
Right.
unless there's enough, somehow, some kind of education that,
Lyrica did the
It's
same
not-
thing.
right, oh, you can solve that, just take the
Yeah,
pill.
just take Lyrica.
Right.
But
So it's sort of the way we feel about depression now. People say, well, just go take the pill, what's your problem? So, anyway, not
I can't remember the name of the drug, but it's a lupus drug. And Human Genome Sciences, I think, was just sold to GlaxoSmithKline. Anyway, the drug was. But it was tested for lupus, the whole population of lupus. And it didn't get approved by the FDA because they said it's not effective enough. And they told this company to go back, exactly what they told hemispherics to do, go back and look at the data in a different way, conduct another study or two. And they did, and what they found was that this drug was highly effective in, it was a subgroup of about 20% of the population of lupus. It turned out to be black male lupus patients that this drug was most effective in. That resulted in the approval of the drug, but the label had to have those specific qualifications on it.